For 10 years, families in Alabama lived with questions that never had answers. Loved ones gone without a trace, communities haunted by silence, and cases that seemed destined to remain unsolved. But time has a way of uncovering truths. These are 5 mysterious disappearances, each tied to famous names that were finally solved after a decade of uncertainty. Chapter 1. The Murder of Amore Wiggins, 2012, solved 2022. In January 2012, the city of Opelika, Alabama, became the focus of a mystery that would take a decade to solve. On January 28th, a passerby made a chilling discovery behind a trailer at Brookhaven Trailer Park on 1775 Hurst Street. Hidden near the edge of the wooded lot were the skeletal remains of a small child, bones scattered and weathered by the elements. Some were buried, others exposed. What disturbed investigators most was that no one had reported a child missing. There was no name, no file, no plea from desperate parents. The little girl was completely unknown. The remains were sent for analysis. Forensic experts estimated the child was likely between 4 and 7 years old. She was black, and based on bone structure and dental records, had probably died sometime between 2010 and 2011, more than a year before she was found. She had never been reported missing. Pathologists found strong evidence of long-term abuse. Her bones showed signs of repeated trauma. Fractures in the arms, legs, ribs, shoulders, and skull. Some of these injuries had partially healed, indicating a history of sustained mistreatment. Her body also showed signs of severe malnutrition. Her growth was stunted. Her condition, heartbreaking. Near the bones, investigators found a pink long-sleeved shirt. It had ruffles, heart-shaped buttons, and was child-sized. A small bundle of tightly curled hair lay close by. No shoes, no ID. Just this quiet tragedy behind an old trailer in a small Alabama town. There were no immediate suspects, no missing persons report, no open case to match her description. The child had simply vanished from society. In an effort to identify her, investigators turned to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Forensic artists created facial reconstructions based on the shape of her skull. Over the years, these renderings were revised as new technology emerged. They were shared on flyers, social media, news sites, and public spaces across the country. But no one came forward. In 2016, after years of silence, a new lead emerged. A vacation Bible school teacher from Greater Peace Church in Opelika contacted police. She remembered a little girl who attended a class in the summer of 2011. The girl had been quiet, withdrawn, and noticeably unkempt. She also had an apparent deformity in her left eye. The teacher had taken photos during the program, and one of those images resembled the reconstructed face of Jane Doe. The girl in the photo had a scarred eye and matched the estimated age and race. But the church had not formally registered its students. No records, no names, just a memory and a photo. It wasn't enough to identify her. In 2017, investigators turned to isotope analysis. Scientists tested her bones to determine the geological makeup of the water and food she had consumed. The results showed she had spent most of her life in the southeastern United States. The science narrowed the focus, but didn't bring them closer to a name. Forensic genealogy changed everything. In 2020, the Opelika Police Department partnered with Othram Inc., a private lab specializing in advanced DNA testing. With help from genealogist Barbara Ray Venter, the team constructed a genetic profile using a degraded DNA sample from the remains. This profile was uploaded to genealogical databases, where it was compared to samples from the public. In 2022, after months of work, the team found a breakthrough, a match to distant relatives. From there, they traced a long and complex family tree. Eventually, it led them to a woman in Maryland named Sherry Wiggins. Sherry Wiggins confirmed she had a daughter born on January 1st, 2006. Her name was Amore Jovea Wiggins. The case finally had a name. Court records revealed a troubling history. In 2009, when Amore was just 3 years old, Sherry Wiggins lost custody. A family court in Maryland granted full custody to Amore's biological father, Lamar Vickerstaff, Jr., a man living in Alabama and serving in the U.S. Navy. His wife, Ruth Vickerstaff, was listed as a legal guardian. Sherry was ordered to pay child support. Her visitation rights were suspended. Still, she complied with court orders and regularly paid support. She never stopped asking about her daughter. What she didn't know was that after the custody change, Amore slowly disappeared from public records. She was never enrolled in school. No daycare logs, no health records, nothing. She was completely removed from any system that might have noticed her absence. By 2011, she had gone missing. There were no reports, no inquiries, no alerts. No one asked where she was. The last known photo of Amore was taken in the summer of 2011 at the Vacation Bible School in Opelika. Investigators believe she died shortly after that event, making her around 5 or 6 years old at the time. Her death, and the concealment of her remains, marked the end of a short life mostly lived in silence. In early 2023, authorities finally acted. On January 17, 2023, Lamar Vickerstaff was arrested in Florida and charged with felony murder in connection with Amore's death. His wife, Ruth Vickerstaff, was also arrested and charged with failure to report a missing child. Neither had ever notified authorities that Amore was gone. The arrests came 11 years after her remains were first discovered. During that time, Amore had been known only by a placeholder name. A girl with no identity. Only through DNA technology and genealogical persistence was her name restored. Following the arrests, Amore's case became a national headline. The facts were stunning. A child placed legally with her father, with no follow-up or oversight from Child Protective Services. No school flagged her absence. No agency intervened. Sherry Wiggins learned about her daughter's fate not through a phone call from law enforcement, but through the news. She was devastated. For more than a decade, she had believed her child was alive and being cared for. She had tried to reconnect. She had asked for visitation. And now, after all that silence, she discovered that Amore had been dead for years. Chapter 2. The Murders of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hallett, 1999, solved 2023. 2 teenage girls vanished after a birthday party. By the next morning, their car was found abandoned. Inside the locked trunk were the lifeless bodies of 17-year-olds J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hallett. Both had been shot. One had been sexually assaulted. The crime stunned Alabama in 1999, but no one was ready for how long it would take to find the truth. For nearly a quarter of a century, the murders remained unsolved, hanging over a grieving community like a wound that refused to close. And yet, as science advanced and families refused to stop demanding justice, the truth would finally surface, revealing a killer who had been hiding in plain sight the entire time. J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hallett were not just names in a file. They were daughters, friends, and teenagers filled with promise. Both were 17 years old, inseparable in their friendship. They had grown up in Dothan, Alabama, a town where families knew one another and where life seemed predictable. J.B. had just celebrated her birthday days earlier, turning 17 on July 19, 1982. She was known for her lively spirit, her curiosity, and her tendency to light up a room with her energy. Tracy, born February 25, 1982, provided a quieter contrast. Thoughtful, kind, and steady. Together, they created a balance. J.B. encouraged adventure, while Tracy anchored decisions in caution. Their bond was the kind of friendship that seemed unbreakable, forged in shared secrets, laughter, and the plans of young girls imagining their futures. On July 31, 1999, J.B. and Tracy left home for a night that should have been ordinary. They were heading to a birthday party in Ozark, just 20 miles away. Both girls were dressed for the evening, carrying the excitement of teenage life in a small southern town. Parents expected them home later, as always. Nothing suggested this night would end differently from countless others. Yet, sometime between leaving the party and attempting to return, they disappeared. By morning, their families were desperate. Calls went unanswered, their beds remained empty, and before long, police were involved in a case that would devastate everyone connected to them. On August 1st, 1999, a black 1993 Mazda 929 was discovered on Herring Avenue in Ozark. The car belonged to J.B., who had recently received it. At first glance, it looked like a simple abandoned vehicle. Doors locked, windows rolled up, keys missing. But when officers forced the trunk open, they uncovered a horrifying reality. Inside were the bodies of both girls. Each had been shot in the head. J.B. had been sexually assaulted before her death. Investigators immediately secured the area. The crime scene provided a disturbing puzzle. There were no clear signs of struggle inside the car, and nothing appeared stolen. The killer had locked the doors, suggesting control and intent. J.B.'s purse and belongings were still in the car, ruling out robbery as the motive. Instead, the evidence pointed towards something far more personal and cruel. DNA samples were collected from semen recovered on J.B. The technology of the late 1990s allowed investigators to build a genetic profile of the unknown perpetrator. It was clear, precise, and held the promise of eventual justice. But when compared against existing databases, the DNA produced no match. Whoever had committed this crime was not in any law enforcement system at the time. The most important piece of evidence was, for the moment, silent. The community of Ozark was shaken. These were two well-known, well-loved girls, killed in a manner both brutal and calculated. News reports spread quickly, warning parents to be vigilant. The idea that someone capable of executing two teenagers and leaving them in a trunk was walking free, horrified families across Alabama. In churches, prayers were offered. In homes, doors were locked earlier. And in the Hollett and Beasley households, the world had collapsed in ways that words could barely express. The murders of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett quickly grew into one of Alabama's most haunting cold cases. Detectives poured hundreds of hours into the investigation. Leads flooded in, some from witnesses who claimed to have seen the girls that night, others from people eager to offer theories. The police followed each one, but progress was painfully slow. Over the next 2 decades, more than 100 DNA profiles were checked against the evidence. Each time, detectives hoped for a match that would end the family's suffering. Each time, disappointment followed. Without a direct hit in the database, the profile remained a phantom, a clue without a name. Meanwhile, the families endured a life suspended in grief. Tracy's mother, Carol Roberts, kept her daughter's room untouched for 24 years. Posters still hung on the wall. Her belongings remained in place, as if Tracy might walk back in at any moment. For Carol, preserving that space was a way of keeping her daughter close, of refusing to let time erase her presence. The Beasley family suffered in silence as well, carrying the unbearable knowledge that J.B. had been brutalized before her life was taken. News coverage came in waves, often reigniting community attention around anniversaries of the crime. Each time, hopes rose, only to be crushed when no breakthroughs came. Detectives retired, new ones inherited the files, but the result never changed. The case seemed cursed, locked in a cycle of false starts and lingering questions. Why had these girls been targeted? Who had the opportunity, the knowledge, and the cruelty to carry out such a crime? And how could someone capable of such violence continue living without drawing suspicion? The pressure weighed heavily on law enforcement. Even as DNA science advanced, no match appeared in criminal databases. The killer's identity remained shielded by the simple fact that he had never been convicted of a crime requiring DNA entry. By the mid-2000s, the case had become symbolic of the limitations of traditional investigative methods. Police had the evidence they needed, but not the means to link it to a person. It would take a new kind of forensic science to breathe life back into the investigation. In 2019, 20 years after the murders, a new tool changed everything: genetic genealogy. Unlike standard database searches, this method compared crime scene DNA to profiles uploaded by ordinary people to public genealogy websites. These were not criminals, but family members who had submitted DNA for ancestry testing. From those connections, investigators could build family trees and trace suspects through bloodlines. The cold case team decided to apply this technology to the Beasley and Hallett murders. The semen sample collected from JB was reanalyzed using modern methods. From there, genealogical databases identified relatives of the unknown suspect. Step by step, investigators built a family tree, eliminating branches until they landed on one name: Coley McCraney. McCraney was a 45-year-old truck driver living quietly in Dothan, Alabama. Married with children, he had never been considered a suspect in the original investigation. His name had never appeared in the case files. To neighbors, he seemed ordinary, blending into daily life without drawing attention. But when police obtained a fresh DNA sample from him, the result was undeniable. It matched the semen recovered from J.B. Beasley in 1999. After 20 years of uncertainty, science had finally identified the killer. The news sent shockwaves through the community. How had a man capable of such crimes managed to avoid suspicion for so long? Why had his name never crossed investigators' desks, despite living in the same region all these years? And most haunting of all, what might he have done during those 20 years of freedom? The wheels of justice turned slowly, but they turned. In 2023, Coley McCraney finally stood trial for the murders of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hallett. Prosecutors presented the DNA evidence with clarity. It was his semen on J.B.'s body, and the probability of it belonging to anyone else was beyond question. The defense attempted to raise doubts, but the weight of forensic evidence, combined with the circumstances of the crime, proved overwhelming. Jurors listened to testimony from investigators, forensic experts, and family members who had waited half their lives for this moment. The trial became not only about the guilt of McCraney, but also about the endurance of families who refused to let their daughters be forgotten. In 2023, after 24 years, the jury delivered its verdict. McCraney was convicted of murder and sexual assault. The announcement brought tears, relief, and an indescribable heaviness. Justice had been served, but the lives taken could never be restored. For the families, the verdict was both an ending and a reminder of what they had lost. Chapter 3. The Death of Wanda Jean Mays, 1986, solved 2008. She ran out of the house barefoot and vanished into the fog. Moments later, she was gone. All that remained behind were shards of broken glass, streaks of blood, and a trail of confusion that would haunt her family for decades. What happened to Wanda Jean Mays that night in 1986 became one of Alabama's most unsettling mysteries. A case where questions outlived answers for more than 20 years. When resolution finally came, it left relief, but also deeper questions that no one could quite explain. Wanda Jean Mays was 26 years old when she disappeared. She was born into a close-knit Alabama family and lived a life that, on the surface, looked stable and ordinary. She worked as a nurse and was known for her caring nature and dedication to others. Wanda had no criminal record, no enemies that anyone could identify, and no known reason to vanish into the night. But family members later recalled that in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, she seemed uneasy, perhaps overwhelmed by pressures she never fully shared. They described her as troubled, not in the sense of danger to others, but as though weighed down by something she could not put into words. On the evening of October 17, 1986, Wanda spent the night at her cousin's house in Guntersville, Alabama. Their home sat near the wooded hills and bluffs overlooking Lake Guntersville, a region of rugged beauty that could also feel isolating after dark. That evening, relatives noticed that Wanda appeared distressed. She was quieter than usual, withdrawn, but no one believed she was unsafe. She went to bed in a guest room, seemingly settling for the night. But sometime between midnight and dawn, everything changed. When family members went to check on her, they found chaos. The bedroom window was broken from the inside, with glass scattered across the floor. Blood stained the shattered frame and the curtains, clear evidence she had cut herself while escaping. Her shoes, purse, and keys remained untouched in the room. The front door was still locked. Wanda had left behind every essential item and walked out barefoot into the fog. From that moment, confusion turned into fear. Why would a young woman break a window to flee a house filled with family members she trusted? Why would she leave without even putting on shoes? Neighbors were awakened and relatives spread out through the property, calling her name into the night. The thick fog made it difficult to see even a few feet ahead. There was no sound, no movement, no sign of Wanda. By sunrise, it was clear she had vanished without explanation. A missing persons case began, one that would stretch on far longer than anyone imagined. The following days saw a search unlike anything the quiet community of Guntersville had experienced before. Authorities launched a massive manhunt that stretched across the surrounding woods, fields, and bluffs. Search dogs were brought in. Boats scanned the surface of Lake Guntersville, and divers searched beneath its waters. Helicopters hovered overhead, their spotlights sweeping across thick forests and rocky terrain. Volunteers from the community joined in, combing through caves, ravines, and hillsides. Every possible hiding place was checked. The search extended for miles around the home where she had disappeared, but no trace of Wanda was found. Investigators exhausted their leads. Without evidence of foul play and without a body, the case stalled. Officially, it went cold. Families were left with silence, and questions multiplied. As the years passed, Wanda's disappearance became a painful chapter in local history. Her relatives endured birthdays and holidays with an empty seat at the table. Some clung to the hope that she might still be alive somewhere, struggling but out there. Others feared the worst but could not prove it. The uncertainty was a punishment of its own. Newspapers occasionally revisited the story, reminding readers of the young woman who had vanished without explanation. But each article ended the same way. No new evidence, no resolution, only unanswered questions. 17 years later, in 2003, there was a breakthrough. Hikers near the base of a bluff not far from Lake Guntersville discovered human remains. The area was rugged, dotted with steep cliffs and thick undergrowth. Investigators recovered bones, clothing fragments, and other items from the site. It was clear that the remains had been there for many years, exposed to the elements. But identification was not immediate. The technology available at the time could not conclusively confirm the identity. The case reopened, but once again stalled, the new evidence sitting in storage until forensic science caught up. In 2008, modern DNA testing was applied to the remains. The results brought clarity at last. The bones belonged to Wanda Jean Mays. After more than 2 decades of uncertainty, her family finally knew her fate. The location of the remains suggested she had left the house that night and wandered into the rugged terrain around the lake. Investigators concluded that she had likely fallen from the bluff, a deadly accident rather than an act of violence. There were no signs of an attack, no evidence of another person's involvement. Forensic experts determined that her injuries were consistent with a fall from significant height. The mystery of her disappearance was technically solved. But even with answers, troubling questions remained. Why had Wanda broken the window to escape that night? Why had she run barefoot into the fog, leaving behind everything she owned? What had caused the visible distress her family noticed in the hours before? Some speculated that she had suffered a sudden panic attack or a mental health crisis. Others wondered if she had been frightened by something no one else saw or heard. The explanation of an accidental fall brought closure, but not full understanding. Families could accept that her remains had been found, but the reasons for her actions that night remained shrouded in mystery. For Wanda's relatives, the confirmation was bittersweet. On one hand, the agony of not knowing had finally ended. They could lay her to rest, honor her memory, and stop searching. But the details of her final moments offered no peace. The image of her running barefoot into the woods, frightened and alone, continued to haunt them. The unanswered question of what drove her to flee lingered as heavily as the night she disappeared. Even investigators admitted that some mysteries could never be solved by science or evidence. Sometimes the truth was locked away in the mind of the person lost, leaving only fragments for others to interpret. Chapter 4. The Disappearance of Natalie Holloway, 2005, Confession in 2023. In 2005, she vanished on what should have been the happiest trip of her young life. 18-year-old Natalie Holloway boarded a plane with her classmates, bound for Aruba to celebrate their high school graduation. What began as a sun-soaked adventure turned into one of the most haunting missing persons cases in recent history. Paradise offered no answers. Instead, it produced confusion, deceit, and years of rumors. Her disappearance captured international attention, fueled endless speculation, and left her family trapped in uncertainty that lasted nearly 2 decades. For years, the world wondered where Natalie was, what had happened to her, and why justice seemed impossible. Then, in 2023, the man suspected from the very beginning finally confessed, but only when forced to under unrelated charges. His words gave her family the truth they had waited for, though not the justice they had long deserved. Natalie Holloway was 18 years old, a bright and ambitious student from Mountain Brook, Alabama. She had just graduated from high school with honors and was preparing to study pre-med at the University of Alabama on a full scholarship. Her future looked limitless. Friends described her as outgoing, energetic, and someone who made others feel welcome. Her mother, Beth Holloway, spoke of her daughter's determination and optimism, qualities that made her disappearance all the more shocking. Natalie had never been in trouble, had no reason to disappear, and no history that could explain what happened. She was on a supervised trip with more than 100 classmates and several chaperones, part of a tradition for graduating seniors. The plan was simple: a week in Aruba to celebrate freedom before college life began. The students stayed at the Holiday Inn in Palm Beach, spending their days swimming, tanning, and enjoying the local culture. Nights were filled with parties, clubs, and the excitement of young people testing their boundaries in a foreign place. Aruba was marketed as a safe island, a jewel of the Caribbean. Parents felt secure allowing their teenagers to travel there. Natalie herself had called home to share stories of the trip, giving no sign of trouble. But the final night changed everything. On May 29th, Natalie and her friends went to a popular nightclub in Oranjestad called Carlos and Charlie's. It was crowded, loud, and filled with tourists. As the night ended in the early hours of May 30th, Natalie was seen leaving the club with a Dutch exchange student named Joran van der Sloot and 2 brothers, Deepak and Satish Kalpoe. That was the last verified sighting of her alive. When Natalie did not show up for her flight home the next morning, panic set in immediately. Her belongings were still in her hotel room, including her packed suitcase, passport, and personal items. She had clearly planned to leave with her classmates. Chaperones called her mother within hours, and Beth Holloway and Natalie's stepfather flew to Aruba the very next day. The disappearance of an American teenager in a foreign country instantly drew attention. Within days, Natalie's case dominated U.S. headlines. Aruba, a small island reliant on tourism, became the center of global scrutiny. Police launched an investigation, but from the very beginning, it was plagued by missteps, conflicting accounts, and shifting stories. The initial focus centered on Joran van der Sloot and the Kalpoe brothers. They admitted to being with Natalie that night but gave conflicting versions of events. At first, they claimed they had dropped her off at her hotel. When that was disproven, their stories changed repeatedly. Van der Sloot, in particular, lied multiple times, offering elaborate and inconsistent tales. He once claimed he left Natalie on the beach alone. Another time, he suggested she had collapsed and he panicked. None of his accounts matched the evidence. Detectives arrested the 3 young men several times, but without a body, without definitive forensic evidence, and with Aruba's legal system requiring stronger proof to hold suspects, charges never stuck. They were released, rearrested, and released again. Each time, Natalie's family felt hope rise and then crash. The search for Natalie was exhaustive. Police, volunteers, and specialized teams combed beaches, scoured the ocean, and checked remote areas of the island. Divers searched reefs, caves, and abandoned wells. Hundreds of tips poured in, many false, others impossible to verify. American FBI agents joined Aruban authorities, trying to bring additional expertise. The intensity of media coverage was unlike anything the island had seen. Cable news stations covered the story around the clock. Tourists were interviewed on beaches, locals were questioned repeatedly, and every rumor became international news. Yet despite the spotlight, no trace of Natalie was ever found. Aruba's landscape, with its deep waters and isolated coves, provided endless hiding places. The ocean itself became both the prime suspect and the perfect accomplice. As months turned to years, the case became one of the most famous unsolved disappearances of the 21st century. Natalie was officially declared legally dead in 2012, though her body had never been recovered. For her family, the absence of remains meant there was no closure. Beth Holloway refused to give up. She made multiple trips to Aruba, confronted Vandersloot in person, and spoke publicly about the failures she believed had allowed him to escape justice. She became a tireless advocate for families of missing persons, pushing for stronger international cooperation in such cases. Yet behind her determination was the same wound that never healed, not knowing exactly what had happened to her daughter. Meanwhile, Joran Vandersloot's life spiraled into notoriety. In 2010, 5 years after Natalie disappeared, he was arrested in Peru for killing a young woman named Stephanie Flores. He was convicted and sentenced to 28 years in prison. That case renewed focus on Natalie's disappearance. Many pointed out that if authorities in Aruba had held him accountable sooner, Stephanie might still be alive. Still, even as Vandersloot served time in Peru, he never faced charges for Natalie's disappearance. The breakthrough came in an unexpected way in 2023. Vandersloot was extradited temporarily to the United States to face federal charges in an unrelated case of fraud and extortion. He had attempted to scam Natalie's mother by promising to reveal the location of her daughter's body in exchange for money.
He claimed that he had Natalie's remains and that he wanted to sell her remains to me.
A cruel deception that added to the family's suffering. While in U.S. custody, prosecutors offered him a deal. In exchange for leniency on the fraud charges, he had to tell the full truth about what happened to Natalie. For the first time, under oath in an American courtroom, Vandersloot confessed. He admitted that on the night of May 30th, 2005, he was alone with Natalie near a beach.
We lay down together in the sand, and we start kissing each other. I get her to kiss me again. We start kissing each other, and I start feeling her up again, and she tells me no. She tells me she doesn't want me to feel her up. I insist. I keep feeling her up either way. And she knees me. She ends up kneeing me in the crotch. When she knees me in the crotch, I get up on the beach and I kick her extremely hard in the face. And I see right next to her there's a huge cinder block laying on the beach. I take this and I smash her head in with it completely. I decide to take her and to put her into the ocean.
His account, given in 2023, finally explained why she was never found. The Caribbean waters had erased every trace. For Beth Holloway, the confession was devastating and relieving at the same time.
She was killed just by standing her ground.
But you didn't know that before.
No, I didn't know anything.
She fought for her life.
She did.
After 18 years of lies, she finally heard what had happened to her daughter. But even in confession, there was frustration. Vandersloot faced no charges for Natalie's death. The crime had occurred in Aruba, where the statute of limitations and lack of direct evidence prevented prosecution. His words closed one chapter but left another wide open. He would serve his sentence in Peru for the killing of Stephanie Flores. But in Aruba, Natalie's case remained technically unresolved. The confession was enough for the family emotionally, but not legally. It was justice in words, not in law. The public reaction was immediate. For nearly 2 decades, Natalie's case had symbolized both the vulnerability of young travelers and the limits of international justice. Millions had followed the story, and Vandersloot's confession confirmed what many had long suspected. The anger was not just at him, but at the systems that had failed. Aruba's handling of the investigation was criticized again, with many pointing out the missed opportunities and the inconsistent way evidence was treated. The fact that the truth only emerged because of an unrelated fraud case in the U.S. highlighted how fragile justice can be when borders laws and procedures collide. Chapter 5. The Angel Baby Case, Mobile County Infant Murder, 1995, solved 2024. A newborn baby was left in a trash bag. No name, no footprints. Just one silent scream in the night. The discovery was so heartbreaking that residents of Mobile County, Alabama, gave the child a name of their own, Angel Baby. For nearly 3 decades, this tiny life was remembered not for who she was, but for how she was abandoned. Her death was one of the state's most painful mysteries, one that seemed destined to remain unsolved. But in 2024, modern science uncovered the truth. It revealed the identity of the woman who had secretly carried the child, discarded her, and lived free for almost 30 years. For the community that had never forgotten, the case was more than solved. It was a reckoning. The story began in the fall of 1995, in a quiet part of rural Mobile County. Woods stretched along the edges of farmland, and the sound of crickets and cicadas filled the night. It was in this remote setting that a resident stumbled upon something they never expected to see. Near an isolated stretch of land, a plastic bag had been left among the brush. Inside, authorities found the body of a newborn. The umbilical cord was still attached, a chilling detail that revealed the child had only just been born. There was no clothing, no blanket, no attempt to provide warmth or shelter. The baby had been left as if she were nothing more than a burden to be erased. There was no sign of burial, no grave marker, no attempt at dignity. To the officers who arrived at the scene, it was one of the most disturbing discoveries of their careers. To the community, it was unthinkable. Medical examiners confirmed what many already feared. The child had been born alive. That fact alone broke hearts across Mobile County. This was not a stillborn infant hidden out of shame. This was a life that had taken its first breaths before being silenced forever. Because no parent came forward, no records were found, and no identification could be made, she remained anonymous. But anonymity did not mean she was unloved. Local residents refused to let her vanish without a name. They began calling her Angel Baby, a name that reflected both grief and tenderness. Donations poured in from strangers who wanted to give her a proper burial. A small coffin was purchased, flowers were gathered, and dozens of community members attended her funeral. For a child whose parents had denied her identity, the people of Mobile County gave her one. In their eyes, she was theirs, and they would not let her be forgotten. Investigators worked tirelessly in those first months. Detectives canvassed hospitals and clinics, checking for any woman who might have delivered a child in secret. Nurses were questioned, medical records reviewed, but nothing surfaced. Tire tracks near the site were examined, though none matched vehicles in the area. Witness interviews produced rumors, but no reliable leads. Even the limited DNA testing available in the 1990s could not provide the answers investigators hoped for. At the time, national databases were small and undeveloped, and without a suspect sample to compare against, the profile from Angel Baby was like a lock with no key. The case quickly grew cold. But while the investigation stalled, the memory of Angel Baby did not fade. Her grave became a place of quiet pilgrimage. Strangers left flowers on anniversaries. Church groups visited to pray. Teachers told students about the infant who had been denied a future, using her story as a lesson about compassion and responsibility. Over time, Angel Baby became more than a victim. She became a symbol, a reminder of what the community valued and of the pain caused when the most vulnerable are betrayed. For law enforcement, the case was a wound they could never fully close. Everything changed in the early 2020s, when forensic science caught up with cases once thought unsolvable. Genetic genealogy, the same technology that had solved some of the nation's most infamous cold cases, now offered a new path forward. Unlike traditional DNA searches that required a direct suspect match in a criminal database, this method compared samples against public genealogy records. People who uploaded their DNA to learn about ancestry unwittingly provided tools for solving crimes. By linking distant relatives, investigators could construct family trees and eventually identify the person whose DNA matched the crime scene evidence. In 2023, Mobile County investigators submitted the preserved DNA from Angel Baby's case to genealogical experts. For the first time in nearly 30 years, the evidence spoke. Relatives were identified, family trees mapped, and slowly the branches narrowed toward one individual. By late 2023, the name of the woman emerged, a 47-year-old living in Mississippi. She had lived an ordinary life, blending into her community, never suspected of carrying such a devastating secret. But the science was undeniable. A direct comparison confirmed the truth. She was Angel Baby's mother. When authorities confronted her, she could no longer hide. Investigators said she admitted to concealing the pregnancy back in 1995, delivering the child in secret and abandoning her in the woods. She claimed she had panicked, insisting she did not know what to do, that fear overwhelmed her judgment. But her words did not change the reality. A newborn had been born alive and left without care, condemned from the moment she was placed in that bag. In January 2024, she was arrested and charged with murder. Nearly 3 decades after the crime, the promise of justice finally began to take shape. News of the arrest spread quickly through Mobile County and beyond. Residents who had attended Angel Baby's funeral wept openly, some saying they never thought they would see the day. Others spoke with anger, wondering how the woman had managed to live freely for so long, building a life while the child she had discarded became a symbol of loss. The trial preparation revealed how the two sides would present their cases. Prosecutors emphasized the facts: a newborn born alive, abandoned, and left in conditions that ensured her death. They described the crime as preventable and deliberate, the actions of someone who made choices rather than being trapped by circumstances. They pushed for life in prison, arguing that anything less would dishonor the memory of the child. The defense, meanwhile, leaned heavily on claims of panic. They painted a picture of a young woman terrified of exposure, acting out of fear rather than cruelty. They suggested she had concealed her pregnancy out of desperation, lacking support, and overwhelmed by shame. But prosecutors countered with a blunt truth. Fear does not excuse actions that end a life. Court observers noted that the case carried not only legal weight, but moral significance. This was about more than one woman and one crime. It was about the community that had stepped in to love a child when her mother had refused to. It was about the persistence of investigators who kept returning to a cold file, convinced it mattered. And it was about the power of science to give a voice to someone who had been denied one in life. In many ways, the trial was not just for Angel Baby, but for every silent victim waiting in dusty case files. The resolution of Angel Baby's case is part of a broader truth about modern justice. Genetic genealogy has rewritten the rules, solving cases once thought impossible. But with that progress comes sobering questions. How many other children, women, and men remain unidentified in graves across the country? How many secrets are buried in family histories, waiting for science to reveal them? And how many other communities will one day feel the mix of relief and sorrow that Mobile County experienced when Angel Baby's story was finally resolved? That baby never had a name, one resident said, but she finally got justice. The words carried the weight of nearly 30 years of grief and persistence. And yet, even with resolution, unease lingers. Angel Baby's story was not only about justice served, but about the painful reality that it took so long. For nearly 3 decades, her mother lived undisturbed, carrying her secret while the community carried the grief. If not for science, the truth would never have been revealed. That truth raises a haunting question. What other voices are buried, waiting for science to speak for them? Across decades, in small towns and faraway places, families waited. They carried unanswered questions through birthdays, anniversaries, and empty holidays. They lived with silence, with graves that offered no explanation, and with mysteries that felt too heavy to ever resolve. Yet these cases prove that justice delayed is not always justice denied. Science, persistence, and the unrelenting love of families have shown that time can be both an enemy and an ally. These 5 cases prove that time doesn't always bury the truth. It sometimes reveals it. Which of these stories shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life mysteries finally solved.